Hello, and welcome to the Presbyterian Women's Bible Study coming to you from Black Mountain Presbyterian Church. This is the fifth lesson in a series that's titled What My Grandmothers Taught Me. You can find previous lessons and even last year's Bible study on the Black Mountain Presbyterian Church's YouTube channel. Now, throughout this lesson, you might come across questions or references, things you might want to discuss with others that are watching with you. I encourage you to pause the video and take the time for a reflection or discussion whenever those occasions arise. Let's begin in prayer. Creating and loving God, as we read your word together, may we allow it to read us. As we enter into your story, may we understand our own stories with more clarity and wisdom. Help us to remember that you have always worked through the lives of ordinary women and men with all their faults and failings, people like us. As we bring our ordinary lives before you today, transform our expectations so that as we study stories of the past, we may be open to your extraordinary future. Amen. We're studying the second part of the story of Ruth. Last month we looked at chapters 1 and 2 of the book of Ruth, and this month we'll look at chapters 3 and 4. Last month we learned about famine and loss and loyal love, chesed. When we closed that first lesson, Ruth and Naomi had a glimmer of hope. They had food on the table and they were reconnecting with family, but the future is still uncertain for them. In this lesson, we're going to learn how Ruth and Naomi, their story unfolds into redemption and acceptance within the family and new roles. I'll begin by reading verses 1 through 6 in chapter 3. One day, Ruth's mother-in-law Naomi said to her, "My daughter, I must find a home for you where you'll be well provided for. Now, Boaz, with whose women you've worked, is a relative of ours. Tonight, he will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash, put on perfume, dress in your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know you're there until he's finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he's lying. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do." "I will do whatever you say," Ruth answered. So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her to do. Naomi knows that she and Ruth are still in a vulnerable situation, but she has a plan, and she gives Ruth some clear directions about putting it into motion. She's sending an unmarried Moabite woman, perfumed and jazzed up, into the dead of night to lie down next to a perhaps drunken man. Now she's to uncover that man in some way, and then wait and see what he tells her to do. Now, by the way, in my reading, I found evidence that the threshing floor tended to be associated with like unseemly behavior and prostitution, maybe an Old Testament version of the cowboys at the end of a long cattle drive, or if you're a country music fan, you may hear Reba McEntire's song Fancy going around in your head. I'm surprised by Ruth's reaction to all this. She seems to accept Naomi's plan without question. We know that she hasn't always obeyed Naomi's advice in the past. I mean, that's why she's still with her in Bethlehem, searching for some kind of security. How do you think Ruth feels about this plan? Is she surprised at the risk involved? How do you feel about it, and why? I'll continue reading verses 7 through 9. When Boaz had eaten and drunk, and he was in a contented mood, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. Then she came steadily and uncovered his feet and lay down. At midnight, the man was startled and turned over, and there, lying at his feet, was a woman. He said, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your cloak over your servant, for you are next of kin." There's a lot to unpack here. First of all, this entire story is full of wordplay. There's a lot of Hebrew words that have double meanings, like to lie down, to know, to go into, and reveal. They're used over and over. And plus, feet was a euphemism for male genitalia. Now, when Ruth identified herself to Boaz when she was gleaning in the field, she referred to herself as his servant. But when she reveals herself here, she uses a different form of the word, one that clearly identifies her as a woman eligible for marriage. Now, you remember when Boaz invoked a blessing on Ruth in the grain field, saying, "May you have a full reward from the Lord, under whose wings you have come for refuge." Now, Ruth turns that blessing on its head, asking Boaz to spread his cloak over her. And in case you haven't guessed, the Hebrew words for wings and cloak are very closely related. Naomi had directed Ruth to wait for Boaz to tell her what to do. But Ruth didn't wait. She steps up, saying in effect, "Put your money where your mouth is. You be the blessing. You take care of me. You serve as God's wing." And she closes by reminding Boaz that he's a next of kin, the kinsman redeemer. Now, according to chapter 25 of Leviticus, the duties of a kinsman redeemer include ensuring that continuity of the family bloodline and ensuring that the property of the destitute relatives stays within the kinship group. One last thought before we move on. In this culture, marriage was usually an arranged affair between the potential groom and the head of the potential bride's household. In her circumstances, how could Ruth have initiated a marriage negotiation? Was her bold act out of line? Or was she taking action in one of the only ways that was known to her? I'm going to paraphrase verses 10 through 18, but you can read the accompanying text if you wish. Boaz responds to Ruth's words. He praises her because in his head, she's come to him rather than to a younger man. He assures her he'll do all she asks, but he lets her know that there's a man more closely related to her than he is. Boaz promises that he'll work it out one way or another. He makes sure her reputation will be safe despite her night on the threshing room floor, and sends her back to Naomi with another load of barley. Naomi seems sure that Boaz will take care of things. Now, in chapter 4, the last chapter of Ruth's story, the focus shifts. Naomi and Ruth have been the focus up till now, and Boaz has been kind of a supporting character, but now we have Boaz entering into negotiation with the man who's a nearer kinsman of Ruth and Naomi. Again, I'm summarizing, but the text is up on the video, and feel free to pause if you'd like to read through it. In verses 1 through 8 of chapter 4, Boaz begins by giving the impression that he's interested in a property deal. It seems almost like an afterthought. He brings up this one little glitch. The property buyer must also acquire Ruth. And if Ruth were to have a son, that son would inherit the property in the name of Ruth's deceased husband. The nearer kinsman doesn't want to weaken the inheritance of his own bloodline, so after Boaz's legal wrangling, Boaz gets what he wanted all along. Verses 9 through 17 carry on the story. Once this legal process is completed, Boaz announces to everyone that he's bought Elimelech's land and he's acquired Mahlon's widow, Ruth, as his wife. The people are witnesses to the fact, and they give him their good wishes. They say, through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah. Reminders of lessons past. So Boaz took Ruth. She conceived and gave birth to a son. The women of Bethlehem sing praises and proclaim to Naomi that the Lord has given her a guardian redeemer to renew her life and sustain her in her old age. They praise her daughter-in-law, Ruth, as being better to Naomi than 7 sons. Ruth has given birth, but the women say a son is born to Naomi. Now, this book is named for Ruth, but in my mind, it's really centered on Naomi. It begins with Naomi's bitterness and ends with her redemption. A lot happens to Ruth, but it happens and springs from Naomi. She's the one who decides to return to Bethlehem. She's the one who suggests Ruth glean in the fields. She comes up with that threshing floor gambit. As the book of Ruth closes, the women of Bethlehem sing praises to the Lord because there's been a guardian redeemer for Naomi. Her famine, her emptiness of heart and arms has been satisfied. Like Naomi, we need redemption and grace and healing and compassion. But sometimes we're like her. We're so fiercely stubborn and self-sufficient in the midst of bitterness and grief that we resist these gifts. Naomi gave Ruth the benefit of her knowledge and her experience and had faith in her. Ruth's gift to Naomi, her fierce, loyal love, her compassion, her hesed, brought redemption and healing. Our study book author ends the lesson by asking, why tell the story of Ruth? And gives some possible answers. And I ask you, why does Matthew include Ruth when he's introducing us to Jesus through his genealogy? What have you gained in studying Ruth? A scholar, Edward Campbell Jr., says in his book, Ruth, A New Translation, Boaz invokes God's blessing upon Ruth only to become himself the agency for the fulfillment of that blessing. Naomi praises the God who still acts with hesed because Boaz has so acted, and it will be the hesed of both Boaz and Ruth, which will bring Naomi fulfillment. In the story of Ruth, human beings, sometimes under the most difficult circumstances, embody God's loyal, steadfast love and redemption. We're called to do likewise, to serve as living examples of God's hesed for all of God's people. Let's close in prayer. God of the outsider, let me stand with Ruth when I sense my own difference or that of another. Help me to see through the closed shutters of preconceived ideas or of my own hopelessness to the small kindnesses of strangers. When I'm stuck in my small world, let Ruth bring me to a wider space where I can see the worth of every person. Most of all, let me never underestimate the power of ordinary goodness, and let me live this in every ordinary moment. Amen. Thank you, and go in peace.